Hello, my name is Dianne Andrews. This documentary you're about to see is about the Silver Dollar Group of the Ku Klux Klan. And many people will say, who is that? Who are they? I never heard of them in one Klan, one Klan. Back in the 1920s, there were 2 million Klanspeople in the United States, the most ever. By the 1950s and 60s, there were fewer. But this group, or sect, was the most heinous in the country in the 60s and 70s. So the Silver Dollar Group did not wear hoods. They were not for profit. Many people don't know that the Klan was a for-profit organization. That is why most of the people who ran the Klan were the leaders in the cities. They were your doctors, they were your lawyers, they were your deputy sheriffs, they were your sheriffs. And they were the ones who collected many of the profits on the Klan. So was all of it hate, or was some of it greed, or were there a lot of both? And I'm sure they were both. But the Silver Dollar Group didn't wear the hoods. They didn't come out and burn the crosses in the neighborhoods. They just killed people. So today you're going to hear a story about them, about a man who integrated the school in Ferriday High School, how the Silver Dollar Group leader, Sonny Taylor, planted a bomb in his grandmother's house. Roy Ennis was in that house. That was the Congress of Racial Equality founder. And thanks to all the powers that be, it did not go off. Deborah Taylor asked Mr. David Wadley to humbly forgive her for what her father did. And he humbly accepts and tells her as they hug, and you will see this, and he says, it is not your fault. You are not responsible for what your father's vile nature was. He had even tried to rape his own daughter, Deborah. There's a book, The Devil's Walking, that you will hear me talk with Stanley Nelson about on the gravesite, basically, of Frank Mars, a shoe shop owner who was burned to death by the deputy sheriff, member of the Silver Dollar Group of the Klan, because he refused to continue to do his work free on his shoes. This was the only shoe repair shop within Concordia Parish, and it was owned by Mr. Frank Mars, a black man for 20, 30 years. And he was burned to death, locked into that door and burned to the ground. You will see that a hallowed ground that we go out to and talk about what happened to him. He lived 4 days, enough to tell the story of who killed him, even though he was burned 99.9% of his body. We also go back to Ferriday High, which today has 4 white kids, which in 1968 had no black kids. This story is about telling the story, the true impact of the Klan, but it's also about a person named Deborah Taylor who showed love to go around and try to find and bring some solace to those people who her father had brought so much pain and frustration to. So it's about love, and it's about the love from people like Miss Deborah Taylor. I have with me now Mr. David Wadley. And this man sitting next to me is a true American hero. He is the man who desegregated the Ferriday High School system here in Ferriday, Louisiana. He was 20 years old, and they asked someone who would go in and desegregate the schools. His grandmother said, if you'll do it, you can do it. She supported him, and at 20 years old, he went in. I want you to tell us about that story, but I'm going to make one other comment. I wanted to thank Mr. David LaPlante from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who Deborah Taylor worked with on a cold case about her father, Sonny Taylor. And also I wanted to thank Stanley Nelson, who wrote the book Devil's Walking, for the work they've helped me do on location here to get people here. And if you keep up with us, again, we did a show, you, myself, and Stanley Nelson, about a month ago, about the Silver Dollar Group and his new book that chronologizes the Silver Dollar Group and how they were the heinous group that they were. Tell me, at Ferriday High School, what was it like to go in there the first day you went there to that school?
Well, the first day I went, I was, of course, accompanied by the members of CORE.
That's the Congress of Racial Equality.
Yes. And what they did, the part they played, they would bring me to the school, and they would stay outside until I was inside the building. So when I first would arrive...
How many people from CORE? They came in from New York?
Yes, New York and elsewhere.
That's who did the Freedom Riders,
Right.
and that was the same group.
Exactly. So when I would go inside, they were to leave. But upon my arrival, when I get in front of the building is a two-story building, and the students would get in the windows up high, and they would pull back the blinds and whatever, and they would shout racial remarks to me, such as they would say, I smell something, and the next one say, what? And they would say the N-word. I don't know if
You
I'm
can say it
allowed to
on here, hey like a nigger, right?
Yeah.
That's what they said. Let's tell the public what was really said back then.
It smells like a nigger to me, okay?
How did you feel at 20 years old? Because you were over 18 when you helped this community out by doing what you did.
Right. Well, it was very devastating. It was something that I thought was very unneeded. It just something that was there, and I didn't believe, and I still don't think that it was the children. You know, the children or have their way, but then I think this was edited by some grown-ups. You know, they would.
Well, hate is not born in a person. You're taught to hate, right?
Exactly, and they would carry on in that fashion. Once I got inside the building, they would make a line across the hallway to prevent me from going to my class, which was upstairs. And they would leave just a small space that I was to try and negotiate. But when I would get near them, they would wait for me to touch one of them.
And they made it so tiny you had to touch one of them.
Yes, and when that happened, then the shouting and the riding, the pushing and shoving would start.
And teachers were never around. No one was around to help you.
No, ma'am.
Where was the Corps? The Corps couldn't come inside the building. They had to stay outside.
Had to stay outside. So they, not knowing what was going on inside, they, I guess, would proceed on back to the headquarters. Anyway. I would do my best to get to my class, and if I was successful, then I would remain the day.
How many months were you there? How many did you last? Because I understand they navigated a way to get you into the Army to Vietnam, where you ended up getting Agent Orange and losing a leg.
Right. I would think, best I can back that far, probably was something like maybe about, better part of a year or better, you know. And they, like you said, kept trying different methods of discouragement from having grown-ups from elsewhere, Natchez and out in the rural area, to come on the campus without being...
We're going to have a map on the screen, and they'll see how close Ferriday and Natchez are from Natchez, Mississippi, just right across the Mississippi River Bridge. But one night, some people came to your house and attempted to bomb it.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, that night, as the nights before, I would return home by escort. As I came to the school, I would go back the same way. I would go home, and we would set ourselves up into different groups. And
I'm going to stop you real quick because there's someone I want you to meet.
Okay.
I want someone to come in who has something to say to you about the bombing of your grandmother's house, which Sonny Taylor was one of the people purportedly to be part of the mechanism that did not go off, that saved the people from the Congress of Racial Equality and saved your life that night, along with your grandmother, Miss Kathleen.
Okay.
Come on, Deborah. I've done a show before with Deborah Taylor also. Both of you are true heroes.
Hi, how are you?
They've never met before. Her father attempted to bomb his house and kill him. And Deborah is the person who went to the cold case files to make sure that there was some resolution and some solace for you people, and to try to help find the bodies of the people that her father was purportedly one of the murderers of the 9 people who were killed by the Silver Dollar Group that we can point to. Her father used to tell her, we take them and we roll them, black people, us, up, and we throw them into the bayous in barbed wire. We rolled them in barbed wires and threw them in the wire. And of course, a lot of purported bombings, and your house was one of them that Stanley Nelson has proved that your father, thank God, it did not go off.
Thank you.
Deborah, I know this is a very emotional time. I think we had some Kleenex up here. Or let me get some.
I'm okay.
You have some?
I would like, at this point, I would like her to know that I hold no animosity, no hatred, no anything, because she had no control over what these guys would do.
Right.
See, I mean,
Her father attempted to rape her. He was just a bad man.
What? Oh, excuse me. That's hideous. I really don't hold anything for her. She is a great person.
That's right, both of you all. Both of you.
And
You wanting to tell the truth makes you a great hero.
Yeah.
And Mr. Wiley, I gave you my Excellence Award for what you've done.
Of course.
And being an American hero. Because you're not just a black hero. You went to and you served our country and lost a leg for that. So you are a great hero.
Yeah,
What we're going to do is let you compose yourself a little. We're going to take a short break. And you all come on back to Dianne Andrews in black and white and hear the rest of the story about the Silver Dollar Group. I just want to take a few minutes and look at these two people. In the 1960s, they couldn't sit here. They couldn't talk. She couldn't even mention a black person's name to your father or to most white people you knew. Correct, Deborah?
Right.
Because Deborah's from a little town near her named Harrisonburg, a few miles from here.
Yeah.
And David, of course, is from Ferriday. Tell me, I see such emotion, and it seems like a kinship between you two because you have a common bond. It happens to be something of evil, and it happened to be your father. And but how do you all feel? Because if it wasn't for Deborah going to cold cases, I saw it on the Advocate that picked it up in Baton Rouge, and then I said, I want to do that show. I want to shine a light to these people and try to help their suffering.
Thank you.
Yes.
You're welcome.
You're brave.
Yeah, so my brother
Put it
told
all
me, he said, you're
together.
driving back from Natchez by yourself down here tomorrow. He said, hey, Klan is not dead. I mean, when they started in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865.
We came through there on the way down.
Oh, did you? Because you live in Tennessee now. I Skyped there being on one show, but they started in 1865, Confederate soldiers as a social group.
Right.
And that's how the Ku Klux Klan started in Tennessee. And back in the 1920s, it was 4 million Ku Klux Klan people in America out of 100 million people in the country. Today, there are 8,000. That tells you right there. It's going. Not that there are not problems. I am not trying to tell anybody there are not problems. There are many problems. But everybody has problems. White on white problems, black on black problems, and white black problems.
Exactly.
But all we can do is do these kinds of things so it never repeats itself. You've heard us talk about Mr. Frank Morris, the only shoe shop maker and repairer in the Ferriday, Harrisburg, Vidalia area for 10 to 15 miles around. He happened to be a black man, but his customers were black and white. And December 10th, 1964, he was burned down inside this shop. He was burned down and he was killed and burned to death. Now I have here with me Mr. Stanley Nelson, who wrote the book Devil's Walking. And in that book, he chronicles the death of Mr. Frank Morris. And we are here today outside, and you will hear some noise, but this is a very important feature to see. It just looks like a slab, but to the people in this area, it's much more than just a slab. Stanley, thanks for being here with me again today. So tell us about what happened here on December 10th, 1964.
So on December 10th, it was the shortly after midnight. Frank Morris was in the back room of his shop, and that back room is right over here behind me. And as he sometimes after midnight, he's hearing glass breaking. He gets up out of his bed to see what's going on. He comes and he has to turn this way, as the shape of the shop is, and he turns into the shoe shop area. And as he looks straight ahead, he can see one man that's holding a gasoline can, and he sees another man with a shotgun. And so he walks up to where they are and he shouts, "What are you doing? Stop that." And about that time, one of those two men strikes a match, throws it through the broken window. It lands inside the shop as Frank's moving toward the front door. As soon as that match hits the fumes inside this building, it just explodes in flames. And as Frank gets to the front door, the man with a shotgun takes that gun, points it right at Frank's head and says, "Get back in the shop." So to get out of the building, Frank had to turn around and go back, retrace his steps, and he had to come out a side door of that shop, and he made his way around to this empty lot over here where 2 Ferriday police officers pulled up. They put him in the car and took him to the hospital. He was in the hospital for 4 days, and at 7:30 on December the 14th, he died.
It wasn't just 2 men, it was 2 Klansmen.
And what we know
Right.
after this happened, it was 2 Klansmen who were part of the Silver Dollar Group. And this was the second Silver Dollar Group murder in Concordia Parish in '64.
Who was the first murder?
The first one was a young black man named Joseph Edwards who was abducted on the Ferriday-Vidalia Highway and has not been seen since, but there's no doubt in anyone's mind that he was murdered.
They never found the body.
Never found the body.
As
and-
we talked to the daughter of Sonny Taylor, one of the Silver Dollar Groups, many times, has said, her daddy said, we wrapped black people, or niggers is what they said, in barbed wire and threw them into bayous. So he may be down in some bayou and said we did the barbed wire because he wouldn't come up.
He could be like that. He could be inside the levee buried somewhere, because we know that Joseph
Was he part
Edwards.
of this Ferriday Freedom Riders movement?
No, Joseph Edwards, what happened with Joseph Edwards was he worked at the Shamrock Motel in Vidalia. And he was sort of a real friendly person. He knew a lot of people. And a white woman who worked as a clerk, registration clerk there at the Shamrock, alleged that Joseph Edwards had forced a kiss upon her. And it wasn't a few days after that that he was traveling on the Ferriday-Vidalia Highway, coming home in his car. Someone saw this white, unmarked police car with a red flashing light on the dash pull him over. That's the last time anyone saw him in his car. His car sat on the side of the road for 2 weeks. His mother went from all over the place trying to find him. She even went to the jail. She couldn't find him. He's missing, hasn't been seen since. He has a sister in New Orleans who, just like you and me, wants to know where his body is. And Joseph Edwards is the only case I'm aware of from that area in which the body's never been found. And Frank Morris is the only case that I'm aware of from that era in which the victim lived long enough to physically describe his attackers.
Yes, Frank Morris lived 4 days in the hospital with 99% of his body burned.
100%.
100% of the body burned. But God gave him the ability to describe the 2 men. And you have tracked down, I think, and spoke with, since you started this journey with your book, starting on chronologizing the Silver Dollar Group, a man out of Alexandria, Louisiana,
That's from
Spencer.
Rayville. He was from
Rayville, up
That's
north,
correct.
more north than here in Louisiana.
That's correct.
Spencer, tell us about him. He is now dead, I understand.
He died 2 years ago. He denied having any involvement in this, but what we were able to do from family members who said that over the years he had talked about having gone to Ferriday and burning down this shoe shop and not expecting anyone to be inside the shop. And
Did Frank Morris live in this shop?
He occasionally lived in the back of the shop. He also owned a little building behind the shop where that night his grandson and one of his employees was working.
The building is gone
It's
now.
gone.
Also. It's
It
gone
was
too.
sitting right behind
Okay,
it there.
uh-huh.
And so,
Why would they expect him not to be here then? He would be here in that building.
well, the thing of it is he occasionally would stay somewhere else, maybe not necessarily here. But that's a good question. You know, why would they not think he was going to be here? They certainly knew he was here when he came up to the front
why
window.
wouldn't we think they wanted to kill him and burn him up anyway?
I think they definitely wanted to set his building on fire. In my mind, I've always wondered why the man with the shotgun didn't shoot him.
Right. They want him to burn.
Well, it could be. We don't know.
I mean, he knew if you set the building on fire, I'm telling you, get back in there, nigger, or whatever the word
Well,
he used. He knows he's going to burn to death in here.
It could also be this. Frank Morris had a run-in with a deputy here over a pair of cowboy boots. And this deputy, who was in the Silver Dollar Group, did not like anyone talking.
What was his name?
His name was Frank DeLauder.
Oh, okay.
And they had an argument over a pair of cowboy boots. And essentially what happened is Frank Morris had told Frank DeLauder that I'm not doing work for you for free anymore. DeLauder would just sort of order people to do whatever
Was he
he
a
wanted them to
sheriff
do.
or
He was a deputy.
Deputy sheriff, okay.
So one day he stood up to him and said, I'm not doing it anymore. So the belief is that DeLauder wanted his business burned out for sure,
Right.
as a lesson to the black community.
How dare you talk to me like
Don't talk
this?
to me like that.
I'm white and you're black.
That's right.
And you're going to do my shoes for me.
That's right. That's right.
So was DeLauder have a connection with Spencer out of Rayville? Has that been connected?
He was not connected to Spencer, but there was a man in the middle named Cooney Paso who was with DeLauder the night before the arson, and who the families of the man from Rayville connect Spencer to this middle man here. That they knew each other, and they were the two that came to the shop that night.
You know, it's so ironical. We're doing this is Black History Month, and we're doing this show in February. And I don't know if you saw, but about a week ago, a current Klan's member was found dead in his car in Missouri. And he was he was one of the Knights, White
One of
Knights,
the
or
many
whatever they call them.
factions,
Yeah,
right.
one of the factions I read. It's only 8,000 Klansmen left. Only, but that's still too many. But back in the 1920s, it was over 4 million Klansmen in America. But now you have other names, skinheads and other names too that are still hate groups.
You will never ever, I don't believe, get rid of hate groups.
I don't either.
They'll always exist. We'll never see a Ku Klux Klan like we had in the 60s. I don't think communities will stand for it.
No.
Law enforcement agencies won't stand for it anymore. But we will always have these situations where violence pops up from these small, probably basically small groups of men. We'll never see these huge numbers again.
You know what I've seen, I agree with you definitely, Stanley, but what I have seen also, sometimes when I Google stuff, you'll see a lot of they have an organization called Daughters of the Klansmen. So you have women also who are invested in hate also. It's not just the men all the time. So there are some women who also have hate in their hearts too. Even doing these shows here, there were certain people we tried to get to come, and they said just leave the past the past. And I don't know if they just don't want to hear it anymore, that it caused them so much grief, or maybe they still have some of these mores and norms in their minds also. You just never know. But we know we've come a long way. We've come a long way in Ferriday as far as understanding people and, you know, black, white, loving people, whether it's just as friends and visiting people and working together. When people have better understanding, they realize we're all the same.
And one sign is this: me and you 50 years ago wouldn't be standing beside each other
I wouldn't have
doing
been
an
here.
interview like this. Well, you know what I mean.
So, Stanley, what is your goal now? You want to shine light on all Klan. You've done the Silver Dollar Group. You've found as many people as you can probably now, you think, right? 9 people, 1 white they killed also. They killed 8 black
We
and
know
1 white.
8 definitely. There's 9 murders that are covered. I know for sure 8 were Silver Dollar, and of those 8, 1 was a white man.
And Frank Morris is not included in that.
No, he is in that number
that
8.
number,
At
okay.
number 8 on both sides of the river is
Okay.
how many we can directly attribute to the Silver Dollar Group. There may be more
Yeah.
that we'll never know.
Because they were, and I will have to say this about the group, they were only 15 men, I think you said.
Hardcore.
And hardcore, and they broke away. Tell us the story of how they formed, Stan.
Well, the thing about the Klan, and it's kind of a picture of it today as well. The Klan sort of operates on 2 different things. It's always created them problems. One is that in traditional Klans, you always had a group in there that believed very much in violence, whereas the others may have been in there strictly because they didn't like black people, they didn't want integration, but you had this core group that always wanted to have violence. So that was always a problem in any Klan. The second deal was, when you see traditional Klans, you typically see them in their robes. They burn crosses, they have these big rallies, hoods. If you belonged to the Klan, you had to pay dues to be in it, a membership due, you had to pay for your robe. So what happened was, Klansmen, the leaders, would tend to enrich themselves off of their own memberships, and that would always be a constant of problems. And so these problems, the Silver Dollar Group guys thought that all of these crosses burning, wearing robes, they thought all of that was silly, ridiculous, a waste of time. They didn't want any sort of pats on the back for what they did. They were so deep into this belief that blacks were inferior and we would not have integration, that they basically just went underground from unknown clans, and they operated strictly within themselves. They were called a clan within a clan, and that's why they were so successful. That's why they got away from
I'm surprised they didn't grow bigger, but they probably didn't want to because with size, yeah, you couldn't do the kinds of things they did.
Cell.
Right.
It's a terrorist cell, and they work best when there's very few, when there's only one leader, and when they do not communicate. Just like ISIS is on TV,
Right.
Silver Dollar Group wouldn't do that.
Right. They don't want
They don't want the publicity.
And that's how they didn't get caught. No Silver Dollar member was ever charged with one thing, were they?
No, they did end up, but it was later and in federal court because 2 crimes were committed on federal property. They were able to bring federal charges against them, but they were convicted right before they died. They spent all of their lives.
Was it of murder?
2 murders, yes.
Who were the Silver Dollar Group names that were convicted?
Over in Adams County, Mississippi, there was a black man murdered named Benchester White.
He's one of the 8 black
He is one of the 8. One of the men that led this group, his name was Claude Fuller. Now, Fuller was never convicted, but 2 other men were with him. One of those 2 men, Ernest A. Vance, was still alive in the early 2000s. He was convicted. And then over in Franklin County, Mississippi, there were 2 black teens that were murdered in 1964. 2 Klansmen were arrested then, but it was not until 2007 that James Ford Seal was arrested in federal court and taken through the federal system. He was convicted. He died in prison in 2011.
How many years did he serve?
4 years for that.
For all the
but he lived his whole life.
Right.
A free man.
And I talked to Deborah once. Her father never thought he had done anything wrong. Deborah Taylor, Sonny Taylor, do you think any of them ever had any regret for the life they had lived and the murders?
I am told that some of the Silver Dollar Group people that did not commit murders did at the end of their lives have regrets and express over and over that they were really sorry for what they had done.
It's like the Democratic governor, George Wallace, back in the day saying, niggas, you're not coming into this school.
Absolutely.
At the end of his life, I understand he changed.
I'm told he did.
The governor of Alabama back in, that was probably the 60s too. I'm joined now by 2 people who were part of the Ferriday freedom movement. Really, they were the resistance, is what they call themselves, against the Klansmen. And a lot of this deaths that the Klansmen did, they wanted to retaliate, not retaliate, basically defend yourself, because Mr. David Watley, you've seen with me before, is part of Deacons for Defense. And Miss Rose Lane is also part of what the Freedom Riders, kind of, you call yourself the Freedom Riders.
Right.
Tell us exactly what that was, the Freedom Riders in the 60s.
We would go through town and, see what was going on and hear how people were being treated and all that. And then we would march.
It was pretty bad here in Ferriday.
It was real bad back then.
Vidalia, Ferriday, Natchez, all of northern Louisiana.
Right.
50s, 60s.
Right. But it really got bad in Ferriday.
Why so bad in Ferriday?
I don't know.
Was there more resistance from you all than there was in Harrisburg? More black people who joined together for Deacons for Defense, for the Freedom Riders? Do you think you fought back more?
I think it was. That was the problem.
That was a part.
Problem. Big problem.
Too, there was more of the Klans people in this area.
With the Silver Dollar Group concentrated in this area, along with the other Klans. Now, I do have to say this. Earlier on the show, we had Stanley Nelson. He is on his way now to interview a Klansman who's 80 years old who wants to talk about things they did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He also, to show you how sacred and how spiritual this property is, while he was being interviewed by me and showing where Rosa Williams' grandfather, Mr. Frank Mars, was burned to death, she called him, not knowing that he was here, not knowing we were on these grounds. So that tells me that we're trying to do the right thing, and Dianne Andrews in black and white, and shine a light on things that people need to know what happened. God is in the plan.
Yes, indeed.
That's right.
See, what's done in the dark will come to the light.
That's right, and that's what's happening now. And even Klansmen and Klansmen's daughters are telling what their parents did.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit more. We've talked to Mr. Wiley. We're going to talk to him on the next show at Ferriday High. So tell us some of your experiences in this area. I think you said there are more businesses
It
in
was
this
a lot
area
of it was a lot of business down here. Like Haney Big House, Jane Watkins had a pressing shop, a little store over there. John Smith had a club.
And most of it was black and white businesses in this area.
Right.
So, and I know Frank Mars did service black and white people.
Right.
And I understand he used to take the shoes out to the white women so there would be no mistake out to the curb.
Right.
That they didn't come in with him a lot of times.
Right.
To make sure no one would get upset
Right,
with him.
right.
But then there were purportedly, I've talked to Stanley about this, but it's never been substantiated, purportedly that he had dated a white woman and that's why they were mad with him too. But it could, you had heard that too?
That's where I felt about it. I don't know.
But also he was friends with some of the Silver Dollar Group. It's a very complicated, convoluted story with poor Mr. Morris.
That's right.
But he ended up a casualty. Tell us some other people that, did somebody get burned down the street? There was something called some hall or some store, a juke joint down the street.
Got burned.
here?
Yeah, the Haney Big House, they burned it down.
And white people did that too. The Klan burned it down. With anybody in it? Did anybody die?
No.
But they just one night just set it on fire.
That's right.
And this was a
Middle of the
black-owned
night,
business.
they got it caught on fire.
Big, nice. What did they do at Haney's Big House?
Oh man, they had like a
I just left the little museum up here, and they had names and stuff on the wall. And they got a
Delta
picture of-
Music
they got a-
Museum? Yeah.
mhm. They got a picture of Haney. And
he was
they
a
had
black
the
man.
People, right. He had Bobby Bland and...
He used to bring
all
them
these
right
people.
down here.
yeah, BB King.
Yeah.
Real blues people. That's why there's such a blues area here. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they used to park the bus right down on
The
the
biggest thing
street.
in town.
Uh-huh.
And all this was built around.
Nice big building.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, we've shown a picture of Frank Morris's. This was a nice building he had for the
Yeah, right.
60s.
A stone
And
building,
no
right.
white man had this. No
He
white
his
man had
own
a shoe shop but
business.
him.
That's all.
And he'd had it for 30 years, I read,
Right,
since he was in his 20s.
Yeah.
I understand he could build a shoe. Did you know him?
Oh, yeah.
And you knew him?
Yeah,
Personally, yes,
she
indeed.
said
Come
have
out
the
there.
jewelry, you know, and we would come try to buy earrings.
Oh, he had jewelry. He was
Yeah.
just an entrepreneur.
Right. And we would try to buy, earrings from him.
Yeah.
But when the white men would start coming in, he says, okay, now y'all girls got to go. But by us being nosy, we'd walk so far over here,
Uh-huh.
and we'd stand back and see what was going on.
What be going on? What would be
But I
going
don't
on
know,
with white people?
the white men come like, sometimes be like 4 or 5 of them coming in at one time. But
To
whatever
bring
was,
shoes or just to talk?
I don't know, I guess it was
Looked
talking.
like just
Talk.
I mean, because, there was some affiliation with the Silver Dollar thing, and they all would go different places. I guess they were going as a group
Talking.
and to make their vision or their part known. This place was here. We had the what we call a Chinese store across the street here.
Chinese store back in the 60s. You had Chinese
right,
people
right,
living
right.
over there?
Yeah.
Right.
In Ferriday, Louisiana, in the
Right.
60s, you had Chinese people.
Right. Still got them here.
Yeah, I know now, but I'm surprised. Now, did the
the
Chinese
ones that
people
all
get along with the black people, the white people, or were there problems?
They got along good with the black people.
So the white people didn't like them either.
Yeah, they had no choice because that was their main source of income.
What did they have?
From the black.
A restaurant, or what was it?
It was a store,
Uh-huh.
a convenience store.
Okay.
Yeah, and meat market type of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was the only store down here, basically.
Uh-huh.
So they treated the blacks the way they wanted to, and at that time they didn't have to go out of their way or anything. I was young at that time, and you'd go in there, and of course they was funky and stuff, but you could tell that wasn't what they wanted to do, the lifestyle they wanted. But they did it because of the situations and the times. And,
Now, what do you all think of desegregation? What you did at Ferriday High School, this area was more profitable, it seems like what you're telling me, 50 years ago than it is today. There are not as many businesses
Right.
here today as there were.
Right, and up that way, they had a few stores and stuff, and a couple of supermarkets, and a couple of furniture places like on the front street.
Owned by black people and white people together.
But no, just whites.
Just whites.
Just whites.
Mhm.
Down here, you had your blacks. And the black mostly consist of teenage clubs and stuff like that. Like with Haney's and Big George
Haney's
Lounge.
Big House. Uh-huh.
Big George Lounge and stuff like
Big
that.
George Lounge, that was a black one also.
Yeah, right.
Did they burn that one down also?
No, it may be still around at the time. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's been a long time. But anyway, this is what the black folks did.
And black people worked in each other's, they bought from each other because we all lived around here. All the blacks lived around here. Now you've got white flight. White have lived, Stanley told me a lot of live out near the lake and different areas. So you lost a lot of businesses and a lot of money. And Ferriday shrunk in population also at Ben Vidalia.
Yeah, what burns down stays down. They don't rebuild anything like that.
What do you all think was a good thing that has come out of I don't call it integration. I did a show on that. It's really desegregation, because integration, again, a lot of whites moved to other areas, so you didn't really integrate.
Right.
Even at Ferriday High School, it's 87% black.
I think the biggest thing came from it was, as I explained to you on the federal court, is that we
Federal
gotta,
court, what were you there for?
to integrate the
Oh, back then in the
school.
60s?
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was that I had the vision that they had all of the best equipment for the school.
When
and
you
stuff
got
like
there,
that.
did they?
They did.
They did. It was much better than the
Right.
black school.
We got
Right.
their old books
Yeah.
after they get torn
Do
up
you
and
think
whatever
now we
else.
should have gone, because we're going to start wrapping it up, but do you think we should have gone for separate but equal?
I don't think so. It wouldn't have happened.
Miss Rosa wants to say some things about what you see, and I still want you all to, give me a brief moment or 30 seconds on, do you think separate but equal would have been better instead of desegregation?
Okay.
But tell me what you wanted to say, Rosa.
I would like to say this. I think the white people in Ferriday fear the black people
Now,
today, and that's why they moved out on the lake and the country from around us. Okay?
don't you think it may have just been some back to the separate but equal, so now a lot of it is separate?
Right.
Yeah.
White people, it's 87% black and fair.
Right.
So most white people are
Still-
where? Out in the
we
lakes
still
and in
have-
other suburbs.
Right.
We still have a problem with that equal thing.
The equal thing.
But now,
It's separate, but it's
yeah,
it's
because
still not
right,
equal.
that's right. Because you look at the public school system now, and our money's being divided
Right.
between vouchers
Right.
and public.
Exactly.
So what do you think of separate but equal?
Well, I think it could be better had, because right now we're separate, but we're not equal, and a lot of it is because of our own doing.
Yeah, well, I was going to say a lot of politicians are black.
That's right.
A lot of school
Right.
board members
That's
are
right.
black.
And they get
That's
it,
right.
and they
But
get
they
white
don't
as
try
the
to
next
help
one.
us.
Well, I wouldn't say white is the next one, but they have the
But I mean, in
same
their thinking and their
in the way they think.
actions.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking
And maybe that's just the way politicians do. It doesn't
They do.
matter what
Right.
complexion
That's it.
you are. I think
That's
it's
it.
a lot to do with
about. Yeah.
what they do.
That's right.
A lot of people start thinking about myself, me, myself, and I,
Yeah.
instead of the people.
Thanks for coming back to Dianne Andrews in Black and White. We've got 3 new panel members. We've got Susan Gilley, who was a resident about 30 miles from Ferriday, and she experienced in 1969 some desegregation of her high school, and we're going to talk about what that seemed like. You've seen Mr. David Wiley. He's a regular on the show, and he is the man who desegregated the school that we're sitting in today, the Ferriday High School. The Trojans, I guess, Ferriday High Trojans, which is now 97% black, which was a high school in 1964, mostly all white. It was all white until you desegregated in 66 is when you desegregated after Frank Morris died, right? After he was murdered. Yeah.
I think we were the Bulldogs then.
And they were the Bulldogs back then, and now we're the Trojans. Okay, they changed the name of the mascot. Now, and next to him I have the principal, Miss Joyce Ross, and she's from Natchez, Mississippi. So, Russ, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've seen. You heard what the students said, the youth.
Yes,
What did you all think? I'll start with you, Joyce.
I think what they said is true. The relations here at the school are fine, but I think when you go out into the community, there's a difference, as it always is with most situations. You adapt to the environment that you're in, but when you're away from it, things change because you're with your peers, and when you're with your peers, you're different than when you are in a situation where you're not as comfortable.
Do you think what we came up with the youth, with the 3 youths, is a good idea for reaching out to the 13 whites who do go to the school and trying to do something outside to see if they can get a better understanding?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
I think that would be, and the social media aspect of it. So as I told them, I'm challenging them for that. So I'll be checking with you in a couple of months to see what Nicholas, who's doing the social media part, will do. And let's see how far we can get. What do you think is the reason that there's so few whites at this school? They have something called white flight schools, is what the mayor has called it to me.
Yes, ma'am. The percentage of blacks that live in Ferriday is there. It's 87%.
Right.
So the percentage of students here is 97%. Most of the kids that go to school here go because they live here. The white kids that go to school live in our school district, so that's why they go here. But there are some who don't go here. They now go to either Delta Charter or they have the option of going to private schools in Natchez.
Now, you went to high school in Natchez.
Yes, ma'am.
What did you see in that high school when you were there? And then I'm going to move to the other two.
When I went to high school in Natchez, I went to North Natchez, and it was predominantly black.
And today?
Well, it's been consolidated now, and it's Natchez High, and
That was North and South
There
Natchez
was
that
North-
consolidated?
yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
And now it's Natchez High, and it's 80% or 70% black and 30% white.
Living in the South and being an administrator in a school, being
Yes,
the
ma'am.
principal, and knowing this area, do you think desegregation has worked for both communities to get a better understanding of each other and to live together and work together? What I'm hearing here is
No, ma'am, it hasn't.
So you think, what did we do wrong?
I mean, I don't know really what we did wrong, but it just seems that one race decided that if we were going to force them to go to school together, then they would
Which
build
is what
schools.
Martin Luther King and our black leaders, SCLC, asked for at that time.
Yes, ma'am. But then other people had means to do something different, so that's what they did. They started making the private schools.
Right, but and got some dollars from the public school system to be able to take money away from public
Yes, ma'am.
and put it in private. And I
Yes,
don't
ma'am.
think that happened with people knowingly. What do you think, Susan, who grew up in Harrisburg or 30 minutes from here? What do you think about the public versus the private? I think when it first happened, it almost seemed like a way we had desegregation legislated. You can that's a law. You cannot legislate integration, though. Integration is mixing together, as we're talking about. It's going to dinner together. It's going to church together. It's being friends together. You can't legislate that. You can't legislate to make people. We can do some reach-out programs, but you have to take that upon your own. So it was legislated for desegregation of the school system, and that's when you went into this school, Mr. Wadley. How do we become more of an integrated, blended society? Do you have any
Well, I think what happened in Harrisonburg, we were a much smaller school system. There were only 32 in my graduating
32
class.
students?
32 students.
So we had 100 students in the whole school,
Yes.
150?
And the next class, I think, had 17 students. So yes, we were a very small school district. So when the new students came in, we were more
The
out.
black, we're talking
Yes,
new black
yes.
students.
Back in '69, we were more out to develop relationships with them.
Really, instead of being standoffish to them.
Right, and they instantly, there were some very talented people who came in with segregation, and we, in those days, had a Monday morning chapel service, and they were immediately
Really?
pulled into that and participated in that. So I think being a small school helped, and I do know that as part of the blog, I interviewed a former teacher at Harrisonburg who told me that one of the things she remembered most about desegregation was that the parents in Harrisonburg were so committed to letting their kids have a decent education, you know, that they...
So you didn't have a private aspect of that. You didn't see a
Right.
lot of private schools.
And there
come
was no
about.
private school in
Really?
that particular area. The few who did go would have come all the way over to this area to go to
Right.
private school.
Now, Mr. Wadley, how does it feel to you to come through these hallways where you were spat on, where you were kicked, and treated less than human? How does it feel to be back here at Ferriday High?
To be perfectly honest with you, it is a chilling effect.
Have you been back since then? Is this the first time? And as I bring you back for the show, is this the first time? Okay.
And as I was saying, it gives you a feel of, well, right now, it's gratifying because I can see progress from what happened.
Yes, we
then.
have a black principal here.
Yes,
Right.
and I hear them say that it's not better. I beg the difference because
The students, what they said.
yes,
I don't think they know from whence
when
people
they
come.
came
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because at that time, you were in the black school, and you had what you call black power, but that was the very minute thing. You were in an area where I have to go back to what is being said now, I guess by our new president, when he said you were living in hell, you know, and you were, but you didn't know the difference because you didn't have heaven to measure it by.
Right.
So what's happening right now?
He's also said 3 times, he said, I'm going to go in and try to help the inner cities. And he doesn't have to say that he was not elected by black people, that's for sure.
Right.
But no other president has ever said that. There are a lot of statistics that people don't know of what presidents have done. And who incarcerated the black people was Bill Clinton. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll briefly say this, that I think Dr. Martin Luther King would probably be turning over in his grave because what his intent was that you would have that freedom, little black boys and little black girls, little white boys and little white girls would be holding hands, which means that you would be friends, you wouldn't be enemies of each other. And my intent here was because there were better equipment, there was better books, better
So
everything
separate but equal,
studying.
because when you came here, you saw that it was not equal. What was the name of the school you went to, the black one?
Ferriday High. I'm
No,
sorry,
before this
Severe
one.
High.
What was the name of
Severe.
it? Severe?
Mm-hmm, Severe High.
What does that mean, severe treatment? We're not going to give you some good books, it's going to be severe over here?
It was Severe High School, and it was, we were receiving the hand-me-downs from Ferriday High.
Did anybody, you're an educator, did you see Hilary Swank in the movie Freedom Writers, W-R-I-T-E-R-S, not the Freedom Riders? You saw what she did in the black community, well, the poor community, but it was, 90% black. You had the one poor white guy in the class, and you had a few Asians in the class. And they were treated that way. And this was, 15 years ago in Long Island, California. And she took that class, which was the worst in the state of California, and she started treating them like human beings. She showed them, you are not alone. She took them to the Holocaust Museum. No one's been treated worse than Jewish people in the world, of what Hitler did to the Jews. They didn't know how bad other people had it to understand how good you still have it in America, even as bad as you think it is. And that's what you're saying.
Right, you got to break out.
You today don't know the perspective of what you went through, and what Martin Luther King gave his life for, and what blacks in the 60s had to go through to get the abilities to come to Ferriday High, even though it may not be what we want it to be today, because people have maneuvered around the system to private schools.
Well, it's a whole lot better than what
Than
we
it
had.
was, yeah.
Yes.
But it's still, right now, it's separate.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's equal either
That's the thing.
to some of the private schools.
But you see, he didn't give his life for us to be able to get good jobs so we can go out and buy
Right, I
alcohol
can
and
tell
buy
you,
drugs and
I'm
come
a
back and beat
mathematics
our wives.
major, and I'm an MBA, and I worked at IBM at 19 years old. I graduated from college on the space shuttle. I was a computer programmer. So I would not have been able to do that. Like Hidden Figures, the movie Hidden Figures, what those women did. And it was hidden, but they still had jobs because they were brilliant in the movie Hidden Figures. But I was, came along and I was able to do what I did at IBM based on the fact of what Martin Luther King did. Now, the school system is a different issue, but we would have never walked in the doors of an IBM or a Shell or a U.S. Steel, probably back in the day, some of the steel companies, if it had not been for the civil rights movement.
Exactly.
Education is what has been left behind, I really do believe.
Yes.
Anything anyone else would like to say real quickly?
Well, quickly, before we close, before you go, is that I would like to tell everybody that this lady has done things that Martin Luther King hasn't done or could not do in his day, things I didn't do. She's an all-around different person, a God-fearing person who has opened the doors and is opening the doors for many of our people and our problems that we can't air any other way. If it weren't for her, we wouldn't be here today telling this, that other people can hear to know where we came from. And like she say, from whence we came. So we need to know, unless you know where you came from, there's no way you can know where you're going.